Welcome back to Asymmetric Power with me, Dr. V. As promised last week, I thought we would delve into a couple of news items and look at them through the lens of asymmetric power. Let's consider two very different events with both political and civic impact and see what we can glean from their implications and see if we can identify their targets. One is the repression of a democratic leader in a dictatorship. The other is a declared policy change by a household name, who is a big tech leader. First, for the dictatorship. In my native Venezuela, Maria Corina Machado was briefly kidnapped and then released during a rally on January 9th, one day before the day the president-elect of Venezuela is sworn in. MCM, as she is commonly known, was protesting that her proxy against the dictatorship, Edmundo González, won in a 2-1 landslide in an election last July, even with incredible odds stacked against the opposition. Nevertheless, the brutal dictator Maduro was having himself sworn in on January 10th for another 6-year term. Electoral results be damned. During the rally, several motorcyclists in balaclavas fired on MCM's entourage and took her in, purportedly under arrest. Very soon after, however, MCM was released and back at her rally. How do we understand this from the dictatorship's point of view? What were they trying to achieve with arresting someone they would soon after release? Well, remember what we discussed last time. In asymmetric war, you always want to destabilize the political base. By taking MCM, the dictatorship showed both to MCM and the Venezuelan people who support her that they still have a monopoly on violence. They can take anyone, anytime. Taking MCM so publicly sent the message that even she is not protected, despite her strong relationships with the US. If she isn't, neither is anyone else who might support her. To wit, several close supporters had been taken and disappeared and then shown tortured in the days and weeks in the run-up to the January 10th swearing in of Maduro. So, why release MCM? Well, it's a bit like a child testing the boundaries. The dictatorship feared two things: reprisals by the US and its allies, and a popular uprising that might overwhelm them, leading to an effective toppling of the regime, as we discussed last week. By kidnapping MCM and then releasing her, the dictatorship reminded Venezuelans once again that they live under a tyranny. Anything can be done to anyone at any time. That instills fear in her supporters. The second target is MCM herself, to frighten her into leaving the country and seeking refuge in the US or Spain, as so many others have done, including the legitimate president-elect Edmundo González. Were MCM to leave the country, the dictatorship would then flood the media and digital platforms with stories of her cowardice and how MCM was really a foreign puppet all along. That message would be amplified by bots and fake social media accounts that would pose as former supporters of hers, who are now horribly disappointed in her. Disinformation, as we discussed last time. Understanding all this, MCM has stayed in Venezuela, a testament to her extreme bravery, while her children are raised in exile without her. Thus, she personally remains a hero to her supporters, although Venezuelans now see no way out from under the Maduro dictatorship. The second event this week I want to discuss is completely different. The announcement by Mark Zuckerberg, known as Zuck, which is also his Instagram handle, the founder and CEO of Meta, which encompasses Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, the biggest messaging app used in most of the world. In a reel posted on his Instagram account, @Zuck, Mark Zuckerberg talked about how his complex systems for fact-checking are being replaced with community notes so that there are fewer mistakes and less censorship on the Meta platforms. Their systems will only specifically target avowedly illicit activities. Drugs, terrorism, and child exploitation is what he identified. Language and views some might find offensive around what Zuck explicitly mentions, immigration and gender, will require someone complaining about them, and then they get reviewed by moderation teams. Teams that are being shifted from California to Texas, a state that, albeit also the HQ of various tech firms, including Elon Musk's Tesla, is also more closely aligned with the incoming President Trump, with whom Zuck promises to work closely in defense of free expression on US-based social media platforms. This is a paradigm shift. Zuck states that he views this as part of a broader societal shift, where people are clamoring for less censorship and for more alternate views to be heard. He cites China, Latin America, and also Europe as a place where regulation is out of control, trotting on the rights of individuals and silencing differing views, including those who believe that mass immigration does pose a threat, that transgender women should not occupy the same spaces as biological women, and that even Europe controls too much access to information to the consumer, even about legal consumer goods. If you are in Europe, as I am, and try to Google anything about opposition to European policies, it's very hard to find. All you get are EU edicts, and that's not by accident. That's by design. Europe prioritizes collective security over individual expression or access to information. Europe has always been a remarkable experiment against the odds, encompassing 27 countries with more on the way, overcoming vast linguistic chasms and even historical hostilities. The EU is truly a wonder to behold, as well as the second largest market in the world. The free movement within its Schengen area, the medical services, the protection of the vulnerable are all wonderful. However, there are tensions, and they are growing. The far right has risen in Eastern Europe and Austria, considered a nexus between East and West since the Cold War, and even within the heart of the EU, France. These new governments will push back against so much regulation of information. We can also expect the incoming Trump presidency, as Zuck explicitly stated in his widely viewed Instagram reel, to use his power in favor of US companies and against big tech and other forms of limitations of access to information for consumers. I recommend you watch this space because it won't be boring. And I invite you to leave your comments below. And if you find this podcast interesting, please subscribe and share it. Hasta la próxima.